levels. It's their surveillance, it's imposed surveillance of people's belongings or surroundings, electronic, listening devices, transmitting, imaging, all that kind of stuff. Micro recorders, video cameras like the news reporter that was harassed through the window of her motel that the guy finally went to jail.
Yeah.
Then there's electronic sabotage, which is actually messing up somebody's computer, destroying it, and they're using EMI pulses more and more. And then there's what we call directed high energy devices, where I've actually seen microwave ovens taken apart and directing high energy beams, which causes heating because it's in the shorter wavelength, so it causes heating on the body. And then it goes up to the EMP rifles, and the technology really starts to blossom from there. And then it comes up to into voice data imaging, and then of course the short wavelength imaging that goes on. And in that form, it's where this radar. There's a company called I forget, it's down here in San Diego. It's called a radar flashlight, and what they do, it detects the human presence through doors and walls up to 8 inches thick. It uses a 16-degree radar beam, and it looks at your movements inside. It looks at how your vocal patterns are, all these kinds of things. They do this from outside your house. Now they wouldn't be able to do it around here where I'm at because it only has a short range. But I'm just saying, in a city, this is no problem. And the radar flashlight, it goes into a bigger emotional. It becomes like an emotional cluster, and it goes into a large system that is put together by the NSA on everybody now, and so you have your vocal speech patterns monitored. So with that, they can then introduce radiation into the body, and it will actually cause you to have involuntary movements and things like that in your body. That's another form of harassment.
When some person says, Fred, that they're hearing voices in their head,
right,
and some people say, you know what, you may be a little nutty.
Yeah.
How many of them are actually hearing something, being bombarded by something?
A lot, because the first time that I had that experience was when I was in the National Health Federation at Chicago Rosemont hotel. The people came out. They were an 80-year-old couple, and they came to me and they said, this truck had been following them around with a microwave antenna on it. They were hearing voices at night in their hotel, in their house, in their apartment. And then they moved in, and then they heard voices again. And this is the early form of it. Well, I kind of shined that on. This is back in about 78 or 79. Then I got down to Florida. We were doing a show down there, and another couple approached me, the same thing. And then we got out to New York City and others, and pretty soon I had about 50 people telling me the same thing. And that was kind of my intro into what was going on.
You're beginning to think maybe something's to this.
Yeah, exactly. So that's when I began to start develop devices to stop that, to break it up. And then the bottom line was, though, it got more sophisticated. It's in the satellite technology now, and they upload these patterns like they would gather from the radar flashlight and other sources, and the people are then totally influenced by this. And unless they do something about it, and you've had John Hall on your show before. He's a medical doctor over in Texas.
Right.
And he and I have been working together. He has literally thousands of people now that have this problem. And I've actually had thousands of clients that have these problems.
Well, how do they select these people to go after?
That's the $10,000 million question.
And why?
I could not answer that. And so neither could John. They select people from all walks of life get selected. Unless
they're experiments.
Yeah, they're experiments.
It could be experiments. It could be saying, let's see if we can drive this person crazy.
Yeah.
And just, see how long it takes, and let's give it a try. Now, again, back in the 50s, government tested chemicals and biologicals over St. Louis, over a Navy ship. It happened. It's true. They've admitted it.
Yeah.
So who's to say this isn't true, too?
Yeah, let me just give you a second here about some of the symptoms for those of you listening.
Let's do that when we come right back, Fred. We're already at the top of the hour. Our special guest tonight, Fred Bell, author of The Inside Track. We'll get some of the symptoms of electronic harassment. Maybe you're being bombarded. We'll find out. listening to Fred Bell with us, too, as we talk about his latest work, The Inside Track, The Complete History of Science, and just what are they trying to do to all of us? Let's find out a little bit more. Symptoms of electronic harassment when we come right back. Here we are with Fred Bell. Fred, what are some of the symptoms of electronic harassment?
Well, there's a bunch of them, and there's also environmental symptoms, too. But just a few are sleep deprivation, fatigue, malaise, irritability, shortening of the attention span, daytime fatigue attacks I see on a lot of people, on older people, cataracts, blood changes, circulatory problems, permanent deterioration of the central nervous system. Another one is very common is blurred vision and loss of concentration, whole body jerk, shaking of the body, heat flashes, artificial fever, shortness of the breath, loss of control of the vocal cords, which is because of that radar flashlight studies, that kind of stuff. Unusual forgetfulness, things like that. And sudden sexual urges, suicidal and homicidal thoughts, panic attacks. And the biggest one that I see of all in the people I did is some form of depression and extreme paranoia. I see that. And sometimes in the environment around a targeted person, some people out there I know are going to relate to this, is the stoppage of power to appliances, manipulation of appliance settings, temporary failures that fix themselves, movements of objects off and off the shelf, under the floor causing breakage, precision and manipulation of switches and controls, premature failure of appliances and computer failures and errors. That's just some of the stuff that goes on. I mean, it does affect the environment, especially if they're doing the millimeter wave stuff, which is a common delivery system.
What is confusion weaponry, Fred?
Well, confusion weaponry it was basically brought about several years ago, where we were using thoughts to frequencies that mess up the thinking system of the body. Okay, this was the original, how it really all started. Later on, it got there were different devices developed that were neurostimulators from a distance. I remember in the very beginning, they were developing devices where they had a control, an implant in your head, and then it was, you would see the effect of it in your head. Later on, it became remote control, and now it's done at a difference, almost on a quantum level. And it's basically impulses that are sent to the body that cause that person to go into some confusion state. A good example of that was just recently. That lady that was on the news the other night, a little blonde girl. You might have seen this. It was about a week ago.
Oh, the one who had they not a stroke, but they think something happened to her.
Yeah.
She had some kind of severe migraine, they said.
Yeah, and she never ever had a migraine before. That to me is probably they targeted her just to see what it would happen while she was on the air, because there were no symptoms afterwards. There was no damage to her body, no neurological damage or any even symptoms. That's confusion weaponry, and that was a good example. I was really surprised to see them pull that out of their hat and immediately, apply that so quickly, but it did. I mean,
that was one of the strangest videos I've ever seen.
Yeah. I mean, the founder, the term confusion weaponry came originally from Dr. Ross Ade, who was formerly of the Brain Research Center at the University of Southern California, and he worked at Loma Linda, and he was worked on the Pandora project, which is part of that stuff that was with the Soviets bombarding us, and it was his definition was specific behavior modifications of electromagnetic means, and the chemical part of it. Now there's chemistry involved here, and that causes what I call a calcium efflux. Okay, and this is usually from the microwave side of it, and when this calcium efflux happens, it throws out the blood pressure rates, and remember, calcium ions are necessary to make the heart beat through the atriums of the heart. If you interfere with that, you start getting voids in the brain, lack of oxygen in the brain, and so the blood pressure starts to go up or down, and that causes a panic attack. So you can see how that goes into a panic attack. And if it goes into a panic attack, then that person's going to run down. If it happens more than once, then they're going to run to Big Pharma for some drugs, some SSRI drugs or something, which brings the drug industry on board. But I mean, that's the kind of stuff that goes on. And this was going back to this goes back to the 60s, okay? And then in the 80s, the doctor a day, demonstrated how 147 megahertz field with a power level of just 0.8 milliwatts per square centimeter causes this calcium influx. And then what happens is they used 147 megahertz carrier, and they modulate it down to 6 to 20 hertz, which is ELF. And the heart likes to beat, I think the heart beats somewhere around 8.1 or 8.2 hertz. So, and it's very easy to overpower, the human body only generates about 20 millivolts, the average person in the brain, sending it down through the central nervous system, which then has to be distributed through all the electrical factions of the body, which is everything. So it doesn't take much with a small millimeter beam to interfere with that delicate process of the human being. And because when you go to that millimeter wavelength stuff, which is considered between 30 and 300 gigahertz, that makes it pencil beam like laser-like technology that once a person is zeroed in on from all of these things we've been discussing about voice and speech patterns and listening to them on the computer and the phone and all of that, it's no problem to zero in with 2 pencil beams on that person and do all kinds of disruptive things, including introduce a audio component between the 2 small millimeter wavelength beams, which has an audio component. People then hear themselves, see somebody's talking in their head. And some of the people I've talked to say that, one lady specific, I remember, she said, it was in the control room. I could hear people in the background talking, and these voices are in my head. And this is very unusual. And then this is the kind of stuff that we run across. And not just one case, a lot. If it was just one, I'd shine it on.
Whatever happened to the weaponry of the audio weaponry, where they could turn it on and people would just go down to their knees? It would hurt them in their ears.
That's very much alive right now. They use it on crowd control. That's considered the friendlier form of crowd control.
I mean, I haven't seen it used in the Middle East, so they don't have it, right?
Well, they make it right down here in San Diego, so one of the companies does. Yes, they will.
Well, I mean, we have it. I don't think.
Oh, yeah, we have it.
Yeah.
I've seen it. It's on a big trailer, has a big antenna, and it works on heat. What happens is it goes to like 1/10 of an inch under the skin, and so it starts getting really hot. And so this audio beam puts out this heat on the body, and they get so hot, they just burn up, and they just start freaking out. It's not so much the high volume. Yeah, there's a screeching to it, but there's a heat faction that they use on it.
Tell me about what they're doing with satellites, Fred.
Okay. Where do you want me to start? We started off with the Corona project a long time ago. They were launched from Vandenberg, and that was spy stuff. And then later on, we came along with the MISTY series, which then became like the Keyhole satellites, the big launch that when NASA got involved was in 91 with the STS-38. Then we have the Iridium satellite, and we had several other satellite companies go up there. And these satellites, one friend of mine started Iridium. I know the guy very well, and he's retired now. But these satellites not only do things down here on Earth, these satellites, because of different countries being involved, they'll spy on themselves. They got satellites up there that cruise around and go from one satellite to another, monitoring the frequencies that it's putting out and where it's transmitting it to.
Huh.
Yeah, but what they do, the first time it came to public scrutiny was, I forget the incident, it's hanging in my head, but I remember what happened.
Was it a Chinese satellite that went down, or was it a Russian one?
Well, it might have been a Chinese one, but the first time that we actually saw the RF stuff was getting some